meeting. We had our program as finance people come together to address the mental health items, and I appreciate the flexibility of everybody in changing their schedules for that day. They did agree that they felt that there should, they may benefit from some time examining some common issues. And so for our next meeting, we are going to try out a schedule where the program would start in the morning, and then finance would come in towards the end of the program meeting. They would have their joint meeting, then break for lunch, and then the finance people would come back and address the finance only, more technical items. So we're going to go ahead and try that. I don't know if we have the schedule for the rest of this year for superintendents. Usually when we start to get March, April, May, we're really talking about fees for next year and planning for next year. I don't know if you want to entertain having a joint meeting, perhaps in March as we begin this discussion. I know we used to have one in January, and I think we'll be hearing from Ralph that there may be a need for a February meeting or January meeting as well. January? Okay. So,
discussion from the council, are you interested in having a joint superintendent finance meeting? Is it joint superintendent program estimate, or just joint?
in the past, it was all three groups met together.
We'll bring in our finance people as well.
There's a finance committee for WESELPA that has membership from the school districts.
Okay, so
There's
we
a
are.
program group, and then there's this group. So, interest in members?
In the past, I found that we were, first we were all sitting together listening to the
Can't hear. Thank you.
I'm in favor of it. It's been helpful in the past, allows us to discuss all this together. Impact of the future.
It's not like finance, it's like illusion. No, I'm in favor.
Do you have any projection dates?
We have, currently we have a tentative February meeting, and then March, April, May, we have meetings each of those months. When we used to do this before, we did have the whole group together, and then sometimes took just the superintendents with follow-up for action items. So,
My only recommendation for doing it in January is to be prepared with the cover January budget to give time for county offices as well as our local districts to at least analyze the local impact.
yeah, the January meeting may just be a very brief one-item action meeting regarding where we need to
So that
go
would be the
forward.
June meeting.
So I don't know that January we really have enough time to plan, and I know there are a number of conferences through AXA that would make scheduling possibly difficult. So if we used, perhaps the February date, because by March we're going to start really moving into our action items, regarding fee for service and things like that, and budgets. Or we can begin the March meeting like that and have your finance people there. Kathleen, when do you, in terms of taking action?
I think we begin the process, like I said, beginning in March. March is relatively early. The county has had some concerns of moving the action items to April because it gives us more time to really go with the changes that happen in January and getting our budget plan for the next year pretty much settled. So I personally think that March might be a good time to start the process and maybe change the actual action item more to April rather than in March. I know some of them, the stuff that can do in March, but I know that the county can take more complex with the number of services and everything that they're doing. So it takes a little bit longer for that information to be all put together for this purpose. So I think it could start in March. I think it's a good time to get joint discussions.
There's two items that I can think of. Number one is that budget development. It's hard to do it any earlier than mid-March to be able to present PAC procedures for the next year. But also we have the result of the fiscal oversight committee and the new process for future service that does need to be brought forward and discussed. So that's one of them. Because we still haven't made a decision with all three providers on how we're going to develop these services. That's an item that can be brought forward in either February or March, and then with the next month, the actual numbers for budget. Because the district has the superintendent hasn't seen the concept, the new concept of developing a business service. So my recommendation would be to bring that forward to a joint meeting first, the budget for 17.
So what I'm hearing is the joint meeting in March, and then action meeting.
That's what I think for that part. Yes.
Are we looking at our council meeting as the date, or the FAC meeting as the date?
No, it would be your superintendent's council meeting.
On the 16th.
Any questions? So I think we're going to move along in that vein then. We go back to number 3, the risk pool.
At the end of last year, we talked a little bit about risk pools and looking at our XPOT, which is a risk pool, and kind of determining whether or not we should make some changes to it. At that time, it was determined that we would not make any significant changes. However, there was some interest in finding out a little bit more about risk pools. So I took the opportunity, I found one article about risk pools and also surveyed the other state SELPA directors to see what they were doing in their SELPAs. And basically, the purpose of the risk pool is to, share risk. In special education, you can have unexpected expenses at any time. And also, because it is an entitlement program, you can't say you don't have the money for that service. If something new arises mid-year and you haven't planned for it. And this is compounded by the lack of funding that we do get for special education. The federal government has certainly never reached the 40% commitment to funding. And so, our state has to make up the difference. And it's been challenging, particularly in the last couple of years. One of the things you need to consider when looking at setting up a risk pool is this really a cost that needs to be shared? Is there, do all of the districts need protection from that? And also looking at when you have a risk pool, does that then start to create some incentives? So when, costs are shared, it doesn't directly affect, your district budget perhaps as much, and so it may begin to make it easier to say, well, we'll get some of that cost paid off, so we'll go ahead and make that placement. And one of the things they did talk about is many of the cost pools keep a reserve or set up a certain dollar amount, and that's always set aside. And in the way we run our XPOT, we do return any reserve, anything left over at the end of the year. So we really, the way we currently operate, don't have this problem. And then the other caution was that you needed to have a process that was easy to manage, because if you're using up your resources on the other end to operate and make decisions, it's really not cost effective. When I looked at the types of risk pools people had set up, Basically, there were three types. We currently have a risk tool that covers non-public school and non-public agency costs and legal costs through the XPOT. The other type of pool we don't have is the extraordinary high cost in order and suffering pool. And the state does have an extraordinary high cost pool that they have established for non-public school placements that are above a certain dollar amount. And that dollar amount does change each year, and they benchmark that. There's a set amount of money in the pool, and when you apply, you will get reimbursed. If there's more people that apply, you may not get fully reimbursed, but you get reimbursed for the difference between the cost of the placement that exceeds that benchmark dollar amount. And when WESELPAs are operating these, very often it's basically used for unbudgeted one-time costs. So that's where it differs from our current XPOT. Sometimes, they talk about only new non-public school placements. Other times, it's used for placement and services resulting from a settlement. And these are probably two of the major costs you would have that would be unexpected. Sometimes in setting up the extraordinary high cost pool, the WESELPAs look at setting a threshold amount. So, you would only get funded in some places for non-public school placements that were 2.5 times the cost of district-operated programs. In another WESELPA, they use the benchmark being above the total cost of the county operated program and their related services for that program. And I think this is one of those things where you're trying to offset that risk of it being an incentive for placement. Because very often I know, districts, when we're in settlement discussing different placement options and costs involved, they will kind of compare it to the county cost. And so, I'm already paying X dollars to have a student in county cost, so it begins to look like it's not that much more to have them in a non-public school. Also, for this type of cost pool, the reimbursement is limited to 1 year. So the next year, you would pay the full cost of that non-public school placement. So that's really a different concept than what we've had in place. There are many WESELPAs that have non-public school, non-public agency cost pools, and some of them set different criteria for using the cost pool. Some of them, again, only fund new placements. Others have a process by which they have a committee that reviews the placements, and the district has to submit a justification for showing that they've done their due diligence, that this is the least restrictive environment for this student, and there is an approval process that committee then recommends to the governing council to approve those placements. And many of them included that students in licensed care institutions, LCIs, would be funded from the out-of-home care fund, and that is what we currently do here in WESELPA. When they look at reimbursing for these placements for non-public schools and non-public agencies, there were different rates of reimbursement, and it varied. In the documents I looked, anything from 30% was reimbursed all the way up to 70%. We currently reimburse 30% of the placement out of the XPOT. In some plans, they looked at the revenue limit that the district receives for the student, and then subtracted the revenue limit before they made the reimbursement. In some cases, and again, I think this is one of those ways of looking at how can you remove the incentive for placement. They deducted the cost equal to the fee for service for the county program before they reimbursed. So you had to at least pay what you would have paid to have the student in a regional program and then got reimbursed for the difference. Many of the plans looked at reimbursement at the end of the year. And so they set a certain dollar amount in this cost pool. All of the requests came in, and then at the end of the year, if the request exceeded the amount of money set aside in the pool, then you got a prorated amount. So you really don't know for sure exactly what your reimbursement is going to be in that case. And in the Desert Mountain SELPA, this was the only SELPA that had anything like this. They protect each district against the first 30,000